At 0630 hours on March 3, 1943, Major Ed Lanier shoved his B-25 Mitchell bomber down through a hole in the clouds until the ocean filled his windscreen. 50 feet below the nose, whitecaps blurred into a gray-green smear. The altimeter wound down past 200, 100, then tried to stick above zero. "Jesus, Ed, we're going to hit the water," his co-pilot shouted. Lanier ignored him. Ahead, a Japanese transport ship filled the horizon. Black hull, white wake, anti-aircraft guns already starting to track the impossible shape of an American bomber screaming toward them at masthead height. Every rule he'd ever been taught said he should be at 10,000 feet, neat formations, bombs away on command. Every manual said this run was suicide. Every general in peacetime training would have grounded him for even thinking about it. 50 feet, the navigator croaked, eyes glued to the altimeter. Maybe less. "Hold on," Lanier said calmly. "We're not dead unless I miss." Under his left hand, the bomb release toggles were armed. Beneath the belly of the B-25, a single 1,000-pound bomb hung in the bay, fuse set to 5 seconds. 300 yards from the ship, he pulled the nose up a fraction. The Mitchell hopped like a stone over a ripple. "Now!" he yelled. The bomb dropped, hit the water in front of the transport, and skipped, once, twice, like a flat rock on a pond, straight into the side of the hull just forward of the bridge. For a half-second, nothing happened. Then the ship's side bulged. The world turned white and black as the delayed action fuse went off inside the steel skin. Fire and debris blasted out of the transport's flank. The bow climbed, then sagged as water rushed in. Japanese gunners who had been swinging their barrels down at the low-flying bomber vanished in the bloom of smoke. Lanier's B-25 roared past the mast at eye level. In his top turret, Sergeant Davis yelled something half like a cheer, half like a scream. "Direct hit! You crazy bastard! It worked!" Behind Lanier, in the space of 15 minutes, other crews would repeat the same suicide run over and over. 8 Japanese ships, 4 transports, 4 destroyers, would be hit, burned, broken, or sunk. The men who flew those runs that morning had been told officially not to. Skip bombing at 50 feet was banned in early staff papers as unsafe and wasteful. The fact that it now shredded a convoy in the Bismarck Sea was the end of one story, and the beginning of another. To understand how Major Ed Lanier ended up skimming the wave tops with live bombs bouncing in front of him, you have to go back 8 months. Back to when American bombers were dying in neat, useless patterns, and one mad mechanic looked at the ocean and saw a flat stone. October 14, 1943, Schweinfurt, Germany. In the briefing room in England that morning, the logic looked perfect. Hit Germany's ball-bearing plants, cripple their tanks and aircraft, shorten the war. The 291 B-17s that lifted off into gray English dawn thought they were punching a hole straight into the enemy's spine. By the time the survivors limped home, the mission had a new name, Black Thursday. Lanier wasn't there. He was still in the Pacific, but he read the reports, saw the photos, and understood the pattern too well. At 10,000 feet and higher, bombing looked clean, symmetrical, professional. Bomb bays opened, sticks fell, cameras clicked. Reconnaissance photographs showed tight bomb patterns, neat circles around factories and rail yards, and around Japanese and German ships. Always around, almost never on. Pacific convoys told the same story. For 8 months, 5th Air Force had been trying to hit Japanese shipping around New Guinea and the Bismarck Sea with classic high-altitude runs. Bombardiers took pride in their Norden sights. Crews came back claiming direct hits. Post-strike photos told the painful truth. Dark cigar-shaped ships plowed on through blossoming rings of white splashes. 20, 30, 40 bombs walking the water all around hulls that never stopped moving. The math was simple and cruel. A 1,000-pound bomb dropped from 10,000 feet took about 37 seconds to hit the water. In 37 seconds, a destroyer at 30 knots traveled nearly 400 yards.
A bombardier could hit where the ship was when he pushed the button. The bomb would touch down where the ship used to be. Lanier had watched too many films in a darkened room where white spray stalked a black hull and never quite caught it. He'd written too many letters to families explaining why their sons hadn't come back from missions that hit nothing. At the SAM
time, Japanese gunners had time to spot, track, and chew up high-altitude formations. Without escort fighters that could go deep, those B-17s and B-24s were slow, steady targets. Losses mounted. Some convoys took almost no damage and still cost American units 4, 6, 8 bombers. In conference tents and headquarters, senior officers argued numbers and doctrines. On hot, muddy airstrips, the men who actually flew the missions argued about something else. How do we make the bomb hit before the ship has time to dodge? The answer didn't first come from a colonel at a big map table. It came from a wiry, sunburned Australian mechanic with oil permanently embedded in his fingers, who had spent childhood afternoons throwing stones at river barges, the man everyone later credited, or blamed, for the suicide run idea wasn't a pilot at all. Sergeant Jack Harris worked nights in a corrugated iron maintenance shed at Port Moresby, New Guinea. His job, officially, keep B-25 Mitchells and A-20 Havocs in the air. Patch bullet holes, swap engines, curse at stuck control cables. Unofficially, Harris was the sort of mechanic who couldn't leave a bad problem alone. He'd grown up along the Murray River in Australia, skipping flat stones across the water until his arm ached, betting friends how many hops he could get. Now, in 1942, he sat on an ammo crate outside the hangar, staring at the dark shape of the sea beyond the airfield and listening to returning bombers taxi in. Once again, crews climbed down, already starting to explain near misses. "Right on top of them, Jack. Sight said perfect. Photos will show it," one bombardier insisted, shaking his head. Harris said nothing. Later that week, during a rare break, he watched a film of a failed ship attack in the operations hut. Bombs fell in perfect lines. Ships simply turned slightly and sailed between splashes. He frowned. "You're throwing them too high," he muttered. The operations officer nearby snorted. "We're dropping them at the correct altitude. That's how the manuals say to do it." Harris shook his head. "I don't mean altitude, sir. I mean how you throw them." He thought about stones, about how a flat rock thrown low and fast could hit the water and skip forward, driven by speed more than pure drop. "What if you just chucked it lower?" he asked out loud. "Let the bomb hit the water still going forward, like a stone. Skip it into the side." The officer laughed. "You suggesting we fly straight at a ship at 50 feet? Might as well paint bullseyes on the nose. That's suicide, Sergeant." Harris didn't argue. But that night, when a few pilots came around the NG, in stands for coffee, he pulled a grease-penciled sketch out of his pocket. A ship outline, a low-flying bomber, a curved line showing a bomb bouncing once off the water before smashing into the hull. He explained in simple words. "Bombs fall in an arc. Ships move in a line. If you fire from high, they have time to get out of the way. But if you come in low and fast and let the bomb ride its own speed along the surface, it hasn't got time to miss." The first reaction was the same, madness. The second, quieter reaction, from men who were tired of missing and dying for it, was interest. General George Kenney, commanding 5th Air Force, heard about the crazy Aussie mechanic and his Riverstone idea. To everyone's surprise, he didn't laugh. "We'll test it," he said. He also added a rule to the initial experiment orders. Under no circumstances will pilots fly below 50 feet on attack runs. On paper, that kept it sane. In reality, everyone who heard the plan knew that once adrenaline and tracers filled a cockpit, paper rules tended to burn. And men like Ed Lanier were exactly the kind of pilots who would push that new idea right up to the edge of the waves. Lanier heard about skip bombing in a hot, dusty briefing tent with sweat running down his neck. A lanky major from Kenney's staff drew on a plywood board with chalk. "New attack profile," he said. "Approach at 200 to 250 feet. Drop at about 60 feet above the water. 300 to 400 yards from target. Bombs fused for 5 seconds. Idea is to let the bomb skip across the surface and hit the side. Murmurs started around the tent. 200 feet? That's treetop level. 60 feet over a ship's guns? They'll cut us in half. The staff officer raised a hand. General Kenney knows it's dangerous, but what we're doing now is killing us anyway. We're going to practice inland on wrecked ships and derelict barges. No one is to go below 50 feet. This is strictly experimental until further notice. After the formal briefing, Lanier, who'd flown more missions than most men in the room, found Harris leaning against a wing strut, wiping his hands. "You the bloke with the stone-skipping idea?" Lanier asked. Harris shrugged. "Just tired of watching bombs land in the middle of the ocean," he said. "Got any idea what 50 feet looks like from a cockpit?" Lanier asked. Harris grinned. "Lower than you're going to like." The first training runs were ugly. Pilots used to steady, level bombing now had to scream down into valleys and ravines at treetop level, trying to keep their wings flat while every instinct screamed to climb. Bombardiers who trusted Norden sights had to learn to eyeball distance at a few football fields out. Bomb racks, fuses, and arming wires had to be rechecked for low-altitude work. 1,000 pounds dropping a short distance still had plenty of time to kill you if something went wrong. On practice barges, bombs skipped beautifully, and then occasionally bounced over the target entirely, detonating uselessly behind. They adjusted fuse delays. They tweaked speed. They argued over angles late into the night. Ground crews like Harris patched holes and changed engines on Mitchells that came back with branches embedded in their leading edges. Word filtered back from Army Air Force headquarters that some higher-ups were furious. One colonel wrote, "These so-called skip bombing tactics encourage reckless flying and unnecessary loss of aircraft. Under no circumstances are they to be used on active operations without explicit authorization." On some typed copies, that line was underlined, circled, or angrily red-penciled. On others, quietly, it was crossed out. In a small, cramped ops room at Port Moresby, Kenney and his staff looked at maps of the Bismarck Sea and the latest reports. A major Japanese convoy, 8 troop transports and 8 destroyers, had been spotted leaving Rabaul, loaded with nearly 7,000 troops bound for Leh. If they reached Leh, those soldiers would have to be dug out yard by yard from jungle and mountains. High-altitude bombing had barely scratched such convoys before. Escort fighters were still too few and too short-ranged to guarantee cover all the way. Kenney tapped the map. "We are not going to hit them with pretty bomb patterns again," he said. He looked at the list of crews who'd done best in skip bombing practice. Lanier's name was near the top. "Send them," he said, "and tell them. 50 feet is a suggestion, not a ceiling." March 2nd, 1943. Bismarck Sea. From above the overcast, the Japanese convoy looked like nothing at all. Just cloud and empty ocean. Lanier's B-25 group flew in stacked formations, engines droning, men sweating in their flight suits despite the altitude. In the navigation seat, Lieutenant Harris, yes, the same mechanic, now flying occasionally as an extra set of eyes, checked his watch and chart. "Should be under us in the next 10 minutes, he said into the interphone. Lanier nodded, eyes flicking between instruments and the thin breaks in the cloud deck. Behind him, his crew checked guns, reset fuses, said small private prayers. Over the radio, Strike Control gave the update. Convoy sighted by recon at grid. 8 transports, 8 destroyers, course toward Leh. All aircraft, prepare to descend through cloud on my mark. Lanier had seen enough shipping attacks to know what the Japanese expected. Bombers popping out at medium altitude in neat stacks, lining up from miles away, giving gunners all the time in the world. He tightened his harness. "Bomber 2-1 to crew," he said. "Remember the plan. We drop low, fast, and close. If you're thinking about how crazy this is, you're not thinking about the bomb site." "Roger," came grim chuckles from the back. "You heard the man," Harris added. "Like skipping stones, only these ones bite." The order came over the radio. All Mitchell elements, commence descent. Skip bombing profile. Good hunting. Lanier shoved the nose down. The B-25 dropped into cloud, white wrapping the windows, instruments briefly the only reality. Turbulence buffeted the bomber. They rattled through moisture and air pockets. Then they broke out beneath the deck, and the world sharpened. Gray sky, dark water, and there, strung out across the sea like beads, the convoy. Transports lumbered in the center, spewing smoke and spray. Sleek destroyers dance. And around them, weaving in escort patterns, guns already elevating as the unexpected shapes of low American bombers appeared where no bomber should be. "Targets in sight," said the bombardier, voice tight. "First run. Take that lead transport." Lanier didn't answer. He was already lining up. The first flak bursts came almost at mast level, ugly black flowers reaching up rather than down. Japanese gunners, trained to fire at high-passing bombers, suddenly had to aim down at insane angles. Their opening salvos went long or short, filling the air behind and above the Mitchells with metal. "Closing 3/4 of a mile," Harris called. "Altitude, 200 feet. Closing fast." Tracer fire began to flick past the cockpit, red and white lines whipping right to left. Lanier ignored the instinct to jink. Skip bombing demanded something bombers rarely gave, a straight, steady run almost all the way in. He dropped lower, 150 feet, 100. Wave tops began to feel like individual enemies. The destroyer's bow guns swung, trying to track. In the top turret, Sergeant Davis raked a destroyer's bridge with 50 cal fire, buying precious seconds as enemy gunners ducked. "Range 300 yards, the bombardier barked. "Get ready." Lanier could now see individual figures on the transport's deck, sailors pointing, running, some already at their guns. 50 feet, Harris shouted, voice cracking. The altimeter needle trembled near the peg. Spray licked the belly glass. "Bombs! Away!" the bombardier yelled. The first B-25's bomb fell, skipped, and smashed into hull. Lanier watched it go and thought of flat stones hopping down an Australian river. He banked away, throttles forward, as a column of water and fire reached for his tail. Behind him, another Mitchell rolled in, hugging the chop. One by one, the suicide runs began. What followed in the Bismarck Sea happened so fast that most men who were there only remembered it in pieces. One moment, the convoy was a tight, confident mass steaming toward Leh. 15 minutes later, it was a graveyard. Lanier swung his B-25 around for a second look, keeping low and fast to avoid flak. The first transport he'd hit was already listing badly, smoke pouring from the hole amidships where the bomb had torn into her. Men were jumping from the sides, tiny specks in churning white wake. Over the interphone, excited, disbelieving voices crackled. 2-1 to lead. Direct hit on transport. She's done. 3-4 here. Our bomb skipped clean, bounced over, adjusting run. 4-2. Destroyer hit near bow. Fire on foredeck. Kenney's gamble, Harris's sketch, was playing out in real time. The Japanese captains tried to adapt. Some attempted to turn bows toward the bombers to present smaller profiles. Others broke formation entirely, zigzagging desperately. But skip bombing punished panic. A transport that turned too hard exposed a fat broadside, just as a low-coming bomb skipped across swells. Destroyers that raced ahead to throw up more fire found themselves outrunning the transports they were supposed to shield, and suddenly very alone in front of angry Mitchells, whose 50 cals had been specially installed along their sides for strafing. Lanier watched as one B-25 came in on a destroyer at mast height, all guns blazing. The ship's bow guns spat back, tracers flashing past the nose. At 300 yards, the bomber dropped its bomb. It struck so close to the water it threw spray on the destroyer's deck, then slammed into the hull under the forward gun mount. The blast blew the bow upward, tearing plates. When it came back down, it did so half-broken, waves pouring in over twisted metal. "Destroyer's gone!" someone shouted on the radio. "She's breaking! Up!" Anti-aircraft fire grew more frantic and less accurate. Gunners were aiming at blurs screaming past their windows, not leisurely specks at altitude. One B-25 took hits. Lanier saw holes appear in the wing of a friend's plane. Smoke trailed, but the Mitchell stayed low and fast, bomb bay already empty, guns still working. "Hit them now," Lanier told his crew. "Every ship that's still moving." He rolled in on another transport, this one trying to hug a screen of spray kicked up by a nearby destroyer. Top turret and nose guns stitched the decks, cutting down men running for their stations. His bombardier called the range. Lanier rode the chop. At what must have been 50 feet, he dumped a second bomb. It skittered once and vanished into the hull under the aft stack. Lanier pulled up just enough to clear the mast. He felt heat on his face as the ship bloomed below. "2 transports, confirmed burning," Harris said, half to the log, half to himself. Other squadrons joined, A-20s, bow fighters, hammering from different angles. But the kills that stunned both sides came from those insane, low-level runs. When it was over, 8 Japanese ships were either sunk outright or so badly damaged they had to be abandoned. Transports lay burning, some with only masts visible above oil-slick water. Destroyers rolled on their sides, propellers thrashing air. Survivors clung to wreckage as Allied aircraft, short on fuel and loaded with adrenaline, curved away toward base. Back at Port Moresby, when the first Mitchells landed and crews climbed down, faces white with salt and cordite, ground crews rushed forward. "How bad?" someone asked. Lanier pulled off his helmet and blinked at the sky. "Bad for them," he said simply. In operations, when the strike photos developed, officers stared at prints unlike anything they'd seen before. Bomb craters didn't ring ships. They were inside them. Not every run had hit. Some bombs had still skipped wide, fuses mistimed, angles wrong. But the hit rate had leaped from 3% to something that actually mattered. And the so-called suicide run had just turned an entire convoy into steel and fire. In the days after the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, reports flew. Japanese survivors spoke of insane American pilots who flew at mast height, throwing bombs like spears. Commanders complained that there had been no time to maneuver. Bombs seemed to come from nowhere and smash into sides instead of falling tamely from above. In Allied headquarters, stunned staff read their own numbers. Convoy destroyed, troops destined for lay lost at sea, aircrew casualties far lower than expected. General Kenney wired home, describing the attack, the low-level tactics, the results. The same file went across desks at higher Air Force levels, where, not long before, some officers had written that skip bombing was unsafe and to be discouraged. Opinions changed quickly when results glowed this bright. Training memos that had once warned, "Do not descend below safe altitudes," quietly softened. New ones appeared. Skip bombing, when properly trained and applied, is an effective method against shipping in restricted waters. Films of practice attacks were duplicated and sent to other theaters. Instructors in stateside classrooms now talked about masthead attacks and low-altitude skipping techniques. Harris went back to his engines, slightly uncomfortable with the sudden attention. Lanier kept flying. He knew that for every perfect run, there would be days when flak found its mark, when mist hid masts until too late, when a wave rose at the wrong moment. But he also knew something else now. They weren't helpless anymore. The ocean had become a weapon, not just a grave. As for the ban on 50-foot runs, officially, it had never existed in writing. Unofficially, old habits and fears had written it in pilots' heads. Men like Lanier and mechanics like Harris had simply erased it, the only way that matters in war. By doing the thing everyone said would get them killed, and coming be, whacked with results that could not be ignored. Years later, in quiet reunions and faded photographs, veterans of the Bismarck Sea would point at pictures of leaning ships and say, "That's the one where the bomb skipped in, just like a kid's stone." Doctrine would move on. Jets would replace props. Missiles would replace dumb bombs. But deep in tactical manuals, and in the stories pilots told each other over bad coffee, the idea remained. If you understand your enemy's timing, if you use the environment instead of fighting it, if you're willing to go lower, faster, and closer than the book ever imagined, sometimes the suicide run is exactly the thing that saves your friends and ends the fight faster. On a gray morning in March 1943, over a strip of ocean in the Bismarck Sea, one forbidden 50-foot idea proved that in 15 minutes of violence that changed how the Allies killed ships for the rest of the war.